All right, welcome back. Here we are, Bert and I, to discuss some more sports after a very eventful Memorial Day weekend, full of almost too many sports for me to watch all at the same time.
A lot of car racing, a lot of basketball.
Oh yeah, I mean we had an amazing Game 7 finale, or rather 7-game series with the Heat.
Exactly. Well,
Which we didn't predict.
Shouldn't have been Game 7.
It shouldn't have been Game 7, but I may or may not have gotten like zero sleep after the conclusion of Game 6 that we watched because I was scared to death. But as far as the weekend, that series was great as much as it stressed me out. We had Monaco, we had the Indy 500,
all good events.
Yeah, all great. It was fantastic, and hey, I mean, we had a lot of fun. So,
and more to come.
Yeah.
I guess what is it? We got NBA finals starting tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're kind of previewing the NBA finals, and thank goodness, based on our predictions of the Heat actually making it to the finals, and our tomball boy Jimmy actually pulling through.
Attaboy Jimmy.
Hemi Butler. So we actually get to preview this. So very, very happy that I'm not talking about Celtics and Nuggets, as not to completely shade on
or Celtics and Lakers like the NBA wanted. But
that is what
allegedly.
I may or may not have sent like 12 different Twitter conspiracy referee calls from Game 6 against the Miami Heat. But that's neither here nor there, right?
Yeah, it's another lifetime.
Yeah. That was so 4 days ago.
We live in a different world than we did 4 days ago.
Yeah, we're not petty. Anywho, so when we're going into this series that starts tomorrow night, we're recording this Wednesday, May 31st. What are your first thoughts about this matchup?
I'll be honest. I think there's a lot of different, ideas that you can have about the matchup. In one way, you have one series that ends in 7 games. And that would of course be Miami and the Celtics, and then you have another series where it's a sweep with Denver. And so I think you can look at this and really say, the Nuggets are obviously the favorite in winning. I mean, they are the more dominant team at this point. But I don't know. Miami did win the first 3 games of that series. They kind of struggled in those next 3 games, but eventually they did pull through with Game 7. So I don't want to say that it's just 100% that, the Nuggets are the favorite and Miami has no shot at all. But I don't know. I look at these two teams and, it's definitely both teams have their fair share of stars with Jimmy Butler and Joker. I'm really looking, I guess, for me, looking into the series, I'm looking at kind of those guys that are not the superstars. I'm looking more towards, the bench roles. I know
Caleb Martin for the
Heat. Exactly. I'm curious to see, really, and I mean, Game 7 was a great example of this with Miami.
Caleb Martin carried that team along with Jimmy.
You have Jimmy Butler and Bam kind of playing understudy roles to the bench, which is kind of a rarity, I guess, in the game today. I mean, what was it? The bench, I believe, scored 57 points in that game.
Oh, it was something insane. I mean, you had Caleb Martin go off for maybe near 30. Yes. It was at least like 28 or something.
It was a lot. I think you can say Game 7 was won by the Miami, secondary players.
Absolutely.
So I look at this series as a whole, and I really say, and we've talked about this before as well. It's where in these playoff games, your stars are going to be very targeted defensively on the other side. So I think you have to look beyond some of those players. Of course, there might be a game where like a Jimmy Butler just decides a game, or a Joker has a role to where their superstar abilities shine through.
And it's just their night.
Exactly. But I think really where the series is going to be won is going to be in those bench players, whether that's on the Denver side of the ball, or whether that's on the Miami side of the ball.
Yeah. And I mean, like, you look at the key players, right? It's the main 4. You've got Jamal Murray and Jokic averaging 30.4 points per game in the playoffs. Jamal Murray averaging 27.7. Jimmy Butler averaging 29.9 points per game for the Heat. Bam Adebayo averaging 18.5. Those are your 2 superstar matchups, right? And the way I kind of view that is that's the expectation, right? If those guys do that those averages, the fate of the game isn't decided. It's just sitting right here. Now, if one of those two guys goes above those averages or below, then that can sway a game. But if those stay true to their averages, which for most of the playoffs they have, you know, Jimmy had a couple of shaky nights in games 4 through 6, but even when he was not scoring as often, he was still putting up double doubles or dang near triple doubles. You know, I think there was one night he only had 16 points, but he had, I think, 10 rebounds and 10 assists and 11 rebounds or something like that. So it's like, even when he's not filling up the bucket, he's going to find a way to help the team win. And I think the most important thing to consider, like you said, is the role players, right? There's so many, I'm getting PTSD. There's too many, you know, in the last 10 years, Rockets playoff games decided by James Harden doing his average in the playoffs of like 30, which is like, okay, that shouldn't make us or break us. And then our role players, you know, just decide to just check out, right? With the Heat, it's been quite the opposite. You got Caleb Martin, who averages like somewhere, I think in the regular season, he averaged 9.3 to 10 points per game, and he's basically doubled that in the playoffs. He averages 19.3 points per game. He has been absolutely filling it up. He was crucial in almost winning Game 6, and he was 100% the reason. Well, not 100%. A very, very crucial role in winning Game 7. They wouldn't have won it without him. Obviously, Jimmy and Bam had to play well enough. Really, Bam was still kind of playing a little bit off, missing a lot of mid-range shots and even some easy jump hooks. There were so many times I was pounding the table like, Bam, this is your stuff. And also sometimes Bam about his shot selection wasn't that good either. But Caleb Martin was just when they needed an absolute bucket from the outside, which the Heat have to have because your primary ball handler, Jimmy Butler, he can shoot the three, but it's not his go-to, right? So so in order for him to keep getting penetration and get those mid-range shots and also be able to get to the actual bucket and get those layups, those penetration drives that allow him to either facilitate to the outside shot, you got to have a threat of an outside shot, right? If there's no threat of anyone else making a bucket, they're just going to keep putting three guys in the paint.
Well, it's what the Celtics did.
Exactly. So they forced the Heat to rely on somebody else to make outside shots and pull away
that
somebody.
Kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, when you have superstars like Jimmy Butler, or I know they're not playing in this finals, but like Steph Curry or LeBron James, you better believe, you know, you have to account for those players. If you can remove a superstar from a series and say, I'm going to rely on some of those, you know, no names or undrafted or some of those guys that get kind of overlooked, I'm going to rely on them rather than, you know, letting LeBron do what he's going to do or Jimmy or whoever. Right. But I there's one other question I think I kind of want to pose to you. Just when you're looking at, you know, some of those more complete teams, because I think that's really what we're looking at in this finals is you know, we look at the superstars and I mean, you've said them, you know, they kind of, in a way, they kind of cancel each other out. But what bench players or what, you know, 3, 4, 5 areas do you see being a bigger role in the finals?
So if I had to pick one for each, I'm going to name several, but the two to watch, in my opinion, and they really don't even classify as bench because they get starting minutes. But the two I would rather say that be designated as role players that you've got to watch is, for me, with the Nuggets, it's going to be Michael Porter Jr. That dude is a guy that if he's on, he's putting up 25, 30 plus. And he's done that in the playoffs. He's also had times in the playoffs where he puts up 12, you know. He can be streaky. He can be a rhythm shooter. You know, but that's your guy that, like, okay, if the game's tight, but he heats up, game's over. Same thing with Caleb Martin. I will say Michael Porter Jr. has had more experience. He's been in these situations. He was even active back when they were in the bubble. You know, Caleb Martin is a guy he's 27, but he had to really chug his way through the G League. And I mean, I remember when he and his twin brother Cody Martin, where Cody was drafted by the Hornets late in the second round, I think, maybe third round. Actually, no, second round, and Caleb was signed to their summer league team, and he absolutely balled out in summer league just to earn a roster spot for the Hornets, and really primarily played G League. And you got to think about Caleb Martin's side of things with this whole thing, right? Because his brother was the one that was getting role playing minutes for the Hornets. They both were. I mean, I've never seen twins more identical than the Martin brothers. If you haven't looked at them, go look at them. You just can't tell them apart, in my opinion. But they were both playing basically the same position, and they were a dynamic duo at Nebraska. I'm sorry, Nevada University. They were absolutely phenomenal, but smaller conference, smaller team. Going to go a little bit under the radar, and they both did. But one got drafted, the other didn't, and he just scratched and clawed until he got onto the Heat's G League team and worked his way up from there. And now he's 27 and finally getting a lot of big minutes. In my opinion, he is the guy that will make or break a lot of the games you're going to see in this hopefully a 6 or 7 game series, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two main guys. Now with the Heat, you've got Duncan Robinson, which is a guy that really wasn't getting, despite the fact that this guy was an absolute beast in the bubble, right? And that may have had a lot to do with it. No pressure. He's a primary three-point shooter. But he kind of flamed out the last year or two. And he's kind of finally, especially with all the injuries they had, Tyler Herro's been out, Victor Oladipo's been out. He's kind of been forced to get more minutes, and he was hitting clutch shots in Game 7. And he even hit a couple before he kind of flamed out a little bit in the last couple minutes, a couple big shots in Game 6. But more importantly, he's got an increased role due to injuries and also just due to his name's being called, right? And he's performing for the most part. You also got to look into Strus. Got to look into Gabe Vincent. Those are other two role players for them. Gabe Vincent's going to be another primary ball handler to sub in when Jimmy's out. I've seen him do a lot of facilitation, good dribble drives to the bucket. That's a guy that I think is crucial when the few minutes that Jimmy is out, he's got to have the ball, or Kyle Lowry. But in my opinion, Lowry, other than just being somewhat a facilitator, an occasional scorer, and a good defender, Lowry's kind of sometimes been a liability. Last series, we'll see if he steps up. He's obviously he's playing on an injured knee, so I get why he may not be filling up the hoop as much. But the turnovers on offense, when he has been the primary ball handler when Jimmy's been sitting down, have kind of been unacceptable, right? Mm-hmm. That's been a talking point. What's been going on with Lowry? And Lowry's the guy that was brought in from the Raptors to be that. Hey, look, this guy's been there and done that. He's the veteran. He helped alongside Kawhi lead them to a championship. He's the guy that's been there and done that. So especially in this series, you need Lowry to step up and be that very, very intelligent veteran who is going to have a way better turnover to assist ratio than he had in the last series. Now with the Nuggets, like I said, it's really Michael Porter Jr. In my opinion, that's that next key role. But I think we also have to keep in mind with Jamal Murray, right? This is a guy that is relatively still coming back from that injury from last year and the year before. He's been playing very consistent, and he's not a role player, right? We're going back to the big name conversations here.
Yeah.
But you never know with a guy like that. Okay, obviously he's got plenty of rest, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to keep in mind, Jimmy's been here before. They haven't, right?
Yeah.
Nuggets haven't been in the finals, I don't think.
No,
to my knowledge.
I believe this is their first time.
Yeah,
in franchise history.
They lost out last year to the Warriors, I believe, or the year before, something like that. They've gotten close a couple times, but I think usually they've gotten bounced in the second round or third round.
That's an interesting idea, though. That even though that the Nuggets have not been in the finals like ever, I still think that you have to look at this team as if they are the favorites. I mean,
100%.
I mean, you look at what they did with the Lakers and just that's I guess this kind of leads into my next question for you, and to try to get your thoughts on it was, Miami has shown signs of weakness, especially, in games, 4 through 6.
Mm-hmm.
Denver, on the other hand, has not. Does that maybe sway you one way or the other?
Well, I think an interesting stat to look at for this exact question is what was each team's road to get here, right? Let's go back a couple rounds.
Yeah.
You look at the Heat,
the Scrappers.
Look at the teams they played, right? They played 3 of the 4 top 4 teams in the entire league.
But that's what
right?
you do. That's what you do as an 8 seed, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they played the number 1 Bucks.
You have to scrap your way up.
Yeah. Just look at the roadmap, right? They played the number 1 Bucks. They went and played the number 5 Knicks. They played the number 2 Celtics, and now they're gonna in the championship play the number 1 for Western Conference Nuggets, right? Now let's look at the Nuggets. Well, they're about to play their third play-in team, right? Because they started off with the Timberwolves play-in team. Mm-hmm. They then faced the Suns in the second round, which went to 6 games, almost 7.
But that's the Suns are not.
They're not a play-in team. That's the best team in my opinion that they faced yet. After that, it was the 7 seed Lakers, and now they're playing the 8 seed Heat.
But still, though, I mean, you look at some of those play-in teams, and I don't think. I mean, it's the Lakers. I mean, I get it, like
100%. But I will say that Lakers team is.
They're not in my opinion, they were not a play-in team.
But they're also definitely not a 1 seed, in my opinion. So, and the argument I have for that is when LeBron and AD are your 1-2 and your next best person after that, basically for the whole series was Austin Reeves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I get it. D'Lo was supposed to be that third guy. Supposed to be that third guy, put out 28 games, but he wasn't. And the regular season, to some extent, also showed that, right? Obviously, they were a team that started off very, very slow and had to pick up really, really late, but they didn't have it all figured out. I'm not saying the Nuggets still aren't the favorites here because they're so loaded, right?
So I guess I kind of see where you're going, right? I see how the Nuggets are the favorites. Right?
Yeah, they're still the favorites, but they haven't been through the absolute turmoil of a playoff schedule that the Heat have.
Pause. The Miami Heat have still shown a lot of inconsistencies.
I would say the only inconsistency.
I mean, you saw Jimmy in Game 6.
Yeah, well, Jimmy in Game 6 put up what was it, 23 or 25?
But still though, when
it was really Game 5 that was kind of
the problem. The problem is this, right? When I've seen Miami kind of get shut down when Jimmy is not producing, right? Mm-hmm. When Jimmy, who let's be honest, like the Miami Heat, he's their guy. They've kind of been riding him.
Yeah.
When Jimmy does well, the Miami Heat do well. Until Game 7, I haven't seen a Miami team that has had a win without Jimmy having success.
Well, and when you talk about the inconsistency of the Miami Heat, up until Game 4 of that Celtics series, we hadn't seen any inconsistencies with the Heat.
No,
right?
Absolutely.
Like they eliminated the Bucks in 5 games,
but that doesn't.
They eliminated the Nets in, I believe, 5 games.
But that still doesn't. But still, all I can judge is what I have seen over the past series.
Yeah, and it's 100% right to question. Okay, are they running out of steam after the it taking them 4 really 4 extra games?
Yeah,
to eliminate
close out Boston.
Now, the flip side of that is Game 6, you had for the first, I would say, 2/3 of the game, you had a Jimmy Butler that was struggling to fill up the points, right? Get the ball in the bucket. And you also had Bam that was one. I've never seen such bad shot selections from Bam, and the amount of turnovers I've seen from Bam. Those were the things that, in my opinion, were why Game 6 and Game 5 were going so bad.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with Game 6, though, and this is probably what carried their confidence over into Game 7, despite the heartbreaking loss to that tip-in with 0.10 to go by Derek White in Game 6, was, okay, we had a lot of things go wrong. We had a lot of turnovers. This is in Game 6 specifically. A lot of turnovers. Jimmy really didn't get a lot of opportunity. Well, he had plenty of opportunities, but I will say Jimmy was getting I thought
he was getting mugged. He was getting mugged.
I thought I was watching Jordan against the bad boy Pistons. It was that bad. I mean,
he was getting mugged.
And on the flip side, like Jimmy, and look, this is where my bias comes in. So if you're a Celtics fan, just go la 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 for the next 10 seconds. But I was watching Jimmy and Bam get absolutely murdered in the paint whenever they try to drive, because the Celtics were playing a 2-3 zone, and just if they drove in, they'd always have 2.5 guys to help, right?
Yeah.
Anytime they go up, just getting murdered, and Jimmy be hitting the floor almost every other drive down there. And then on the flip side, you see Jaylen Brown get a little and tweet every time. And the stats actually show that too, as far as like just how many free throws were being given to the Celtics versus the Heat. Heck, even one of the referees was getting investigated that refs games 4, 5, and 6. Oh, sorry, games 4 and 5. Yeah. So when it comes to Game 6 in particular, like aside from all of that complaining about the refs I was doing a couple minutes ago, the main thing was you had Jimmy and Bam unable to get those points in the paint as easily as they should have, given what Boston was able to do defensively. And you had all those troubles even just getting clean shots. And then you had on top of that, Bam turning the ball over a ton, and just, especially in games 5 and 6, turnovers were the Heat's biggest problem. Celtics were forcing them and they were capitalizing on them.
But some of that is just, I think it's easy to say that some of that is on Miami. I think it's another thing to say, maybe Boston and how their defense was running.
Oh, 100%. They made a lot of good changes. Joe Mazzulla did a better job. But the main thing was in game 6, you had all of that going and it still came down to one shot.
That's what I'm saying, though, is this, though. It is very easy. And I'll be honest, it would not surprise me at all if you have Denver, especially the fact that they aren't playing a game themselves. You better believe they were sitting there watching film. They were watching how Boston was playing. They were doing their homework, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's very easy for Denver to come out and to have a very solid game plan to replicate that defense and to try to force some of those turnovers that they were seeing in games, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, I will say, the Nuggets have been a very highly graded defensive team.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wonder, my opinion is, I think I lean towards the Celtics, but I wonder between the Celtics and the Nuggets, who's the better defensive team? In my opinion, in regards to guarding your, an opposing team's backcourt, I think the Celtics will be, because the Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum duo, those guys are both long and lanky and very athletic, and really can kind of help guard positions 1 through 4. They can switch, they can go through screens, they can do everything. They're very, very good two-way players. Jamal Murray is good, but I don't think he's Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown good as far as on the defensive end. And Michael Porter Jr. definitely isn't.
That's fair.
So that's the only thing that I think that the Miami Heat get a little bit of an edge in. I think even with the adjustments that the Nuggets could do to cater towards their play style, you're looking at, okay, I think crossing fingers here with my bias. I think Jimmy and Bam may be able to have a little bit easier of a time with their 2-man pick and roll game than they did with Boston in games 4 onwards. Now, I will say on the flip side of that, what the Heat did so brilliantly against the Bucks and in the first 3 games of the Celtics series was if one of those two teams committed towards stopping the 2-man pick and roll with Jimmy and Bam, Jimmy would go off ball. They'd crash the short side if need be to help facilitate this. And they would bring out Caleb Martin or even Duncan Robinson or even Strus or even sometimes Gabe Vincent. And they would run a 2-man pick and roll with that guy and Bam. And Jimmy would be the off-ball guy. Mm-hmm. And like sit mid-range in the wing or even sometimes kind of in the corner from the 3, which is kind of uncharacteristic of Jimmy Butler to sit. Mm-hmm. But they would do whatever they could to set up a pick and roll with someone else, and it worked a lot. You could see more of that coming into this series, right? Just any way to facilitate that pick and roll and getting that penetration, because Miami needs that penetration into the paint. That's where they live, right?
Absolutely.
The outside shots with Caleb Martin and Duncan Robinson, and to some extent Gabe Vincent, Max Strus occasionally. Well,
that's a result. That's a result of the penetration.
It's there. They're not going to be like the Warriors and live and die by that, right? Yeah. Obviously, the 3 is really what helped them in Game 7. They shot, I think, over 40% of the team from 3 through there. They did fantastic. But I think the one thing that in Game 7 Miami did that Boston didn't is, at the beginning of the game, both teams were struggling from the shot. I mean, Miami was like 4 of their first 11 from the field. Boston got off to an early 9-point lead. I'm sorry, they were up by like 5 or 6 points or whatever, and then just kept breaking 3 after 3 after 3, and they just refused to stop shooting threes. More importantly, when you're in those 3-point shooting droughts, it's not that you have to stop shooting threes. It's just stop shooting ones that aren't wide open, right? Mm-hmm. Focus on getting that penetration. And then when someone's legitimately open, like if they were in 2K, they're for sure going to hit a green on the stroke, send it to them. But what a lot of teams that live and die by the 3 do is, whether or not they're contested or not, they just keep throwing up, it's got to go in. It's got to go in. And maybe they don't focus enough on actually trying to get those points in the paint, maybe even doing some mid-range, unlike what the Rockets would do. It was just 3 or layup. Mm-hmm. One of the 2. See which one's working. With the exception of whenever Mike D'Antoni would let Chris Paul off the leash. Yeah. So that's what I think you have to look for in this series, as far as the Miami Heat are not going to be that team that if the 3s aren't falling, they're totally okay because they have other ways to score. Jimmy Butler is primarily, as far as from the outside, he's going to be a mid-range guy. He's also going to be a guy that focuses on getting that penetration and facilitating. And I think that being the heart of the offense is going to help them whenever the shots aren't falling.
So here's my problem with Miami and what they're doing, right? So we've seen in the past, specifically in games 5 and 6, where Jimmy Butler and Bam are going to get pressure on the inside. They're going to dish the ball out to the 3. What if the 3s aren't falling?
Yeah,
and that's the problem where it's kind of that, Golden State mindset, live and die by the 3.
Mm-hmm.
I have a problem with it. I don't like relying on that 100%, but I mean that's part of the game, right?
Yeah, and I mean, in those situations, the flip side to this with like a Golden State, or really more of the example team for this, like a Houston Rockets, of literally living and dying by the 3. I mean, they even, when they were matching up against the Warriors 4 years ago, they were putting up more 3s than the Warriors.
What I'm arguing here is not the fact that the 3 is going to be guarded. It's more so the fact that your shooters are having a bad night.
Oh, 100%. But at the end of the day, if you're getting uncontested looks, even the team under the most pressure, having the worst night, is going to make those. At some point, something's got to go in, or if not, you're at least moving the ball, right? And you're showing the teams, hey, that guy was wide open.
But you've seen situations in the past where shooters are getting good looks.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't buy 3s.
Yeah, and
I know this is a point. It's basketball. You practice those. You should be making them, but it happens, and it always seems to happen to at least my teams in the playoffs. But
the Rockets especially. But like I said, that's what it comes down to. It's not that you in those situations you abandon the 3, and a lot of the guys that I've done some research on have agreed with this. In those situations, like Kenny the Jet Smith, this is exactly what he said was, when you're in those situations, you don't abandon the 3. You just abandon the contested 3. You keep taking 3s, but they've got to be the wide open looks, right? Yeah. Your focus at that point is get the ball in the bucket however you need to. Penetrate, do mid-range,
get points,
floaters if you need to. And that's what the Heat did in those situations a lot of times. That's what dug them out of Game 6 and got them back in there. And then they started having guys making 3s, and then it came down to one shot, right? So that's why when you have a player like Jimmy Butler, that's almost like having the competitiveness of a Kobe Bryant, but also the craftiness of a Chris Paul, and the fact that, okay, 3s aren't falling, I'm gonna hit a midi.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the ball in the box.
I'll be that one guy on the team that will be the guy that takes those mid-range shots from the elbow, and they'll go in. Or I'll hit post fades. I'll hit jump hooks. I'll act like I'm going to a jump hook. The guy will jump, and I'll dish it to Bam. He dunks it. That he can even run a 2-man game when he's separated with Bam by 3 feet. It's still a threat with his ability and vision. So that's the difference in a team like what the Rockets were living down by the 3, where Miami, they don't live or die by anything. They just do what works. And I think their X factor is Coach Spo. Coach Spo has been a huge help with that team. In when something's not working, adjustments are made. I don't see Miami keep doing the same thing over and over again.
It's the best way I can describe this Miami team. And I mean, it's a prime example. It's almost like musically symbolic or musically or ironically perfect that they're an 8 seed going up against a 1 seed, because they're a team that just they do whatever it takes to win.
Well, I mean, and you look at Duncan Robinson, you look at Caleb Martin, you look at Gabe Vincent, you look at Max Strus. I'm pretty sure all 4 of those guys are undrafted. At least 3 of the 4 are.
They are. They were talking about that stat, I believe, in Game 7, where I believe majority of the points that Miami scored that night were from undrafted players.
And this kind of takes me back to a really cool moment in Jimmy's career when he was, when he was coming out of high school. Didn't get a lot of college offers, so he went to Tyler Junior College, right? Had a big year planned for them, and then was able to get one offer or maybe 1 or 2 offers, and ended up playing at Marquette, which isn't the biggest.
It's not
D1
the biggest
school.
Name out there.
It's a school that if they get on a run, they can make the tournament just barely.
Potentially.
And he was there with Jay Crowder. He was with a decent amount of guys who went to the NBA on that team.
Yeah.
But funny enough, Texas A&M basketball's current head coach, Buzz Williams, who coached at Virginia Tech, and then he coached that Marquette team when Jimmy was there. So he actually has a good relationship with Jimmy Butler. And a couple years ago, when Jimmy was having his big runs in 2020 and maybe even 2021, they interviewed Buzz Williams and said, hey, you coach Jimmy Butler. You guys have a good relationship. What was so special about Jimmy Butler when you were coaching him at Marquette? And he actually took a bigger perspective on it and looked at the whole group. And he said, if you look at that group with Marquette, that was a situation where every single player on that team, they came into a situation where it's not that it could work, it had to work. That was their only option for them, right?
Yeah.
You look at Jimmy Butler, his whole career was it just had to work. In high school, it had to work. That was his only option. He was kicked out the streets by his mother at the age of 13 or something like that.
Very much for those of you who don't know Jimmy Butler's story, very Blindside-esque, pretty solid stuff.
Absolutely. Go YouTube it. I won't do the full thing, but was going from house to house in high school. So he basically almost pretty much got adopted, semi-adopted by a friend's family.
Blindside-esque.
Yes. Jordan Leslie's family, another really good athlete out of Tomball who went to the NFL as a receiver, played at BYU. Anywho, like I said, then Tyler Junior College, playing JUCO, taking the risk there instead of going somewhere else, and then going to Marquette. Marquette, not the biggest name, but he had to make it work. He had to somehow get to the NBA. You look at everyone in this Miami team. That's kind of what I think is the reason they're staying so mentally strong in these playoffs. Everything had to work because there was no other options, right? You got 4 guys that are getting 20 plus minutes a night, most of them more than that, as undrafteds, and their entire career up until this point was it just had to work. There was no other options, like Caleb Martin, right? That his brother gets drafted as a 2nd round pick. He doesn't get drafted. He gets a summer contract for the Hornets in their summer league, and it just had to work or his career was done, right? Summer league's a big deal. It's make or break. You don't do it there, you may get a shot at the G League.
Might as well start packing the bags. You're done.
Going to China. That's where you're going. Shanghai Sharks, baby.
Yeah.
So
Guangdong Tigers.
Exactly. So I mean, that's in my opinion. People ask, what's the special juice in this Miami team that makes things work? I go back to what Buzz Williams said about that Marquette team with Jimmy Butler was. You have a bunch of guys collected on the whole same idea of it just has to work, and we're not going to stop until it works.
So obviously Kohl's not biased or anything going into the finals. He doesn't know who he's rooting for at all.
Not at all. No, completely neutral. But no, I don't necessarily think that's bias. I just think that's people ask how is an 8 seed performing
doing so well? Yeah, I think that's fair.
People ask the same questions about Marquette when they were making their runs with Jimmy and Jay Crowder and a couple other people. They were just as shocked. I mean, that was a team that went toe to toe sometimes with people with some of the top 4 teams. They went very deep in their tournament.
Blue Bloods.
Yeah, exactly. So, they were asking the same questions then. They're asking the same things now. They were both underdogs in their respective tournaments. In this case, this is the NBA playoffs. It's the same answer, in my opinion. You got a bunch of guys on a team that have a really, really good coach, and everyone, including the coach, has the same mindset of it's not that it will. It just has to work. Will it work in the finals? We'll find out. I sure hope.
So I think Kohl's going to kind of crap on my last question here because I think I know his answer based off of his monologue there. But I was gonna kind of ask your opinions on the whole idea of, is there a team that has an advantage in this finals based off of rest, as in 4 games versus 7 games? Because obviously, I mean, this is at the end of a season. There's definitely stuff that comes into play. Injuries are more likely to occur under higher stresses. Do you think that could play a factor?
Well, first off, there's nothing to crap on with that question. Absolutely not. This is where I take my bias out of it, right? So, in my opinion,
I don't know. Your monologue there seemed to disagree.
Well, there's a difference between being analytical and bringing up context versus bias. There.
Of course.
I didn't finish that monologue with saying the Heat are absolutely going to win it. They're the best team ever, and Jimmy Butler is Michael Jordan's son. Now, I'm not saying that, but I am bringing up context as to answer those questions. Now, in regards to this one, there's always a debate between momentum.
Yes.
And rest.
I was about to say, you better believe Miami and the entire, Miami area is riding high off of a Game 7 victory.
Yeah, and the Heat ain't going to show up necessarily too cold, right? I mean, they just played a game, heck,
keep riding.
2 nights ago.
Keep rolling
and you want to talk about confidence? They booked the flight to Denver the night before Game 7.
Yeah.
So,
I'm pretty sure every team does that.
I don't know.
In every sport. But
look, it was on my Twitter feed. Okay, it means something. But the bigger thing is, you have one side with the Heat. Yeah, they're not coming in near as rest. I mean, heck, the Nuggets almost got a full week off. Almost, they basically did. Yeah.
Full rest.
So they're going to be their legs are going to be pretty fresh. Or at least they should be.
In theory.
Well, hopefully we don't hear any crazy reports of what they were doing at their time off, going to Vegas or anything. But then you have the Heat with they're going to be a little more tired, but they still get at least 3 days of rest.
Yeah,
2 to 3 days of rest. And they've got that still taste of blood in their mouth right from Game 7. Now, obviously, I don't know how much momentum they actually carry over because you went 3 games straight of real adversity, right? And just absolute nail biter going into Game 7. You also had a heartbreaking loss in Game 6. They carry over some momentum.
Game 6?
Yeah, but
that's you just won the series. Who cares?
Yeah, it's just there's a fair argument to be made of if they say they were going neck and neck for those first 4 games and then they closed it out by winning 2 straight. That would be a lot more momentum, in my opinion, than just barely getting by in Game 7. Well, obviously they blew them out in Game 7.
I don't know. Game 7. There's a saying of Game 7s are different, right? However you get there, coming off a Game 7 win, you better believe. I don't care if you were up 3-0 or you were down, 0-3 to get to a Game 7. You have to believe. I think the Heat, when it comes to momentum, it's all in their corner.
Yeah, and that's what they're riding on, right? That's what they're banking on. It's just a matter of, okay, how much do they really have and how much advantage is that in comparison to the rest of the Nuggets? And in my opinion, for that Nuggets team in particular, we have a player like Jokic, who is a primary ball handler, not but one of them, because you have Jamal Murray and him, a facilitator, a good defender, obviously not the quickest, but good. He just does everything for that team, along with what Jamal Murray does. It's just with Jokic's position at the 5, it just has a way more massive impact than any other position on the floor for the Nuggets. Jokic is a guy that really benefits from that extra rest, right? He's a bigger body. When you have a guy that does everything he does and is as tall as he is and is somewhat as heavy as he is, even though he's slimmed down to what he was 4 years ago. Hey, everything he does puts more torque on his body than, say, the same guy doing it at 6'8" or even 6'9", right? So those extra days he had to rest and kind of recoup from the last couple series, even though they were relatively not as stressful as what they should have been. I feel like that's a bigger advantage for the Nuggets than the Heat's momentum.
I also have to think that, I know I touched base on this earlier in the podcast, but just from a coaching and from a strategical standpoint, you better believe having another week of game planning and possible contingency, planning. You have to look at those factors. And
especially after how good they game plan for the Lakers, right?
Exactly.
And even for them to get through Phoenix in 6 games, that was. It's not like Devin Booker and Kevin Durant had off nights for 2 of those games or something like that. Like, they kept playing well. Obviously, they were out CP3, and that really hurt them because they gave up a lot of good players to get Kevin Durant. So when you lose one of your 3-headed, one piece of your 3-headed monster, hurts a lot more than it than it originally would have. So there's the thing with that. Then, in my opinion, Miami does get a little bit of extra. What's the word? A little bit of an edge with their momentum they're carrying in from just playing a couple nights ago and, not necessarily being stagnant, sitting on their couch watching the other team play for over a week. But with the Nuggets, I think just the need for them to have that rest for Jokic, especially with a player like him, that I think that is a bigger edge than any momentum the Heat carry in. Now, obviously, once the ball touches the floor, all that goes out the window. We'll find out if that's true or not. But in my opinion, just looking at the hypothetical, I like the Nuggets extra rest they got with the players they have versus the Heat's momentum. We already know the Heat are a very, very mentally strong team. That momentum they have from winning a game, I don't know how much they could get in mental confidence, and I don't know how much more farther above they can go than what mental toughness and confidence they already have going there. We know that's an X factor with them.
So after going on a monologue about
Yes.
the Miami Heat and then saying that, definitely, Denver comes in with the edge when it comes to, having game planning and rest on their side. Who do you have?
You want what mine wants or what heart wants?
How about both?
So obviously the heart's saying Heat.
Well, of course. I mean, as am I.
Yeah, I
Heat
mean,
in 4.
Yeah, Heat in 3 somehow. take the game, take less games out of it. Obviously on paper you'd have to pick the Nuggets, right?
Absolutely.
They just have more offensive firepower. They're a deeper team, but I think one thing we almost left out that will be another X factor for the Heat is Tyler Herro should return at some point in the series, maybe even by game 1. And that's a guy that's your 6th man. That's 20 points per game.
Yes.
So,
well, here's the other
the key
question.
is, does he come back himself?
I was about to say, how does he come back? Because we have definitely seen players come back themselves, and we've also seen players come back a little bit short of themselves. So, definitely a point.
So, but you also take into the fact that that team was down Victor Oladipo as well. I will say another thing that you have to keep in mind with the fact that they lost Game 5 and Game 4 was Gabe Vincent was out with that sprained ankle.
Yeah.
That may have happened Game 5, not Game 4, but Gabe Vincent was kind of acting as their primary ball handler other than Kyle Lowry whenever Jimmy Butler would be out. And he was a big piece of being able to move the ball and score.
Yeah.
So that really hindered them in Game 5. So in my opinion, Gabe Vincent's got no more ankle issues. He was back Game 6. He's there Game 7. Big contributor. Now you get Tyler Herro back. Now you finally got a little more depth with this Miami team. Maybe that helps them out. Maybe that helps level the playing field just a little bit, but that's only if Tyler Herro can play regular minutes, his usual what he was doing. My guess is he'll remain being used as a 6th man because that's really what they need, right? They've got to be able to somewhat, Jimmy Butler leave the game if needed be, for obviously his regular amount of rest, especially in the early games, and them still fill up the bucket, especially from the outside. That's what Tyler Herro can do. He's an all-around scorer, 3-level scorer. They definitely need him for this series because he and Caleb Martin have got to match what the capabilities of Michael Porter Jr. can do. So one of those two has got to be able to match him bucket for bucket. And they've got to complete that team. So in my opinion, it goes to the Nuggets as far as who I would vote for with my mind to win it.
Nuggets in...
It could be 6 or 7. I don't know. I definitely, this is where I'll let my heart go over my mind. I definitely don't think this is over in 5.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I look at the two teams and I see very similar depths. I see, talent-wise, very matchy, similar. Momentum, it feels like two sides of the same coin a little bit.
I do feel like with what other team's good at, the other has a decent counter for it.
Exactly.
Nuggets have a better offense. Miami is, my opinion, the best defense at just taking away what a team's good at.
Yeah.
I mean, they put Giannis and the Bucks through a psychological torture chamber of a series, and that was arguably the best offense in the league, right? Obviously they don't have as much time to game plan as the Nuggets do, but just as far as play, they did a fantastic job. And I feel like that is what makes this matchup so interesting is each team's advantage as far as on paper, one has a counter for, right? Nuggets aren't as good of a defensive team, in my opinion, as the Celtics, but the stats actually support that they are one of the better defensive teams. It's not, it's like we're splitting marbles here somewhat.
Yeah.
Very, very small differences.
But
it's better than what the Heat faced with the Celtics, in my opinion.
The situation that we find ourselves in is what makes, sports so great. Is the fact that you have both of these teams that bring something very unique and very particular to the table. And to see those two different styles, clash for the ultimate prize. That's what makes the NBA Finals the NBA Finals.
Well, and sports is always great when what's on paper doesn't happen. Right?
Exactly.
When the odds are defeated and all that good stuff. So, Miami has been beating the paper for 3 straight rounds. We'll see if they can keep that going. Knock on wood, somewhat with my bias to the Heat and everything because of Jimmy. But, I think that's where we kind of have to leave this off. Is it's kind of just a, You
flip your coin, heads or tails.
and the analysis is going to differ game to game.
Exactly. And that's what I was kind of attributing to earlier. It's like, I definitely think we're going to have a game where superstars tend to take over and put points on boards. And I think Joker's going to have a game. I think Jimmy's going to have a game.
Jamal Murray could have a game, or at least a quarter.
Exactly. And essentially what you're doing at this point is, all right, 1-1-1-1. Who's going to take the next?
I tell you what. Let's finish with like each predicting a key stat that would make or break a game. In my opinion, if the Miami keep it to 4 turnovers or less in a game, then they have an opportunity. Especially if I guess I'll put 2 on there. If Bam gets you 20 or more, because he's averaging 18.5, so he gets you 20, 22 or more, and then they keep the turnovers to 4 or less. I'll even give it a little more generous, 5 or less, because they were getting 8, 9, 10 turnovers in some of their games in the earlier series. Then the Miami Heat can win any game.
I'm going to go with a similar stat. I'm going to say if Miami is over, what number do I want to go with here? Let's go 70% from the 3-point line. I think they'll win.
Well, they got to. They're over 70. My goodness. I mean, and it's not like that's unheard of, but 70% from 3, that's pretty insane. I mean, I think if they do that in a quarter, then they have an absolute shot to win the game.
All I'm saying is I might have been a little much with 70. Well, let's lower it down. Let's go to
like 50.
I'll go with 50.
Yeah, 50 is fair.
50%.
And that's kind of what they were doing in Game 7, right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously they didn't need to, because they were blowing them out already once they got past the first quarter. But they kept filling it up. So, hey, we sat here and BS'd about it for, about 40 straight minutes. We gave you our analytical views, but
the bush.
We're all fit. We're just, as a lot of people do, oh yeah, we're going to give you all these odds and talk about and what are the key factors. And then we're just going to close it with, yeah, it's a toss up. It's a coin flip. You never know what's going to happen. It's your stereotypical ending.
That's why they play the game.
Yeah. It's a stereotypical ending to a finals or any big sporting event preview. Even in motorsports, it all comes down to we'll see what happens, but there's your NBA Finals preview.
Game 1 tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Hopefully, I will get this out tomorrow. That's
no
my
promises.
Plan. I'm gonna have that thing uploading tonight, so I may be coming into work tomorrow like with bags under my eyes, but I'm gonna get this freaking thing edited. So, anywho, all right. That's it for this one. We'll see what happens in Game 1.
Follow us on Twitter. Instagram.
Follow us on Twitter. Okay, we need the help. Okay, we got polls. We got hashtags.
All we're asking for is a little interaction.
Yes. We got announcements on episodes. We got polls. We got hashtags. What more do you want, people?
We got a TikTok too.
We do have a TikTok. We do have a TikTok. And we're gonna get Thomas got kidnapped, but we will get him back.
We're planning out a strategical mission to go get him back.
Yeah, 10-4.
It's all secret stuff.
Yeah.
We can't.
Yeah, we can't
divulge.
Yeah. It's all
just know he's going to be back for the next episode.
Yeah. Well, I hope he listens to this episode. Yeah. Allegedly. But yeah, so that's gonna be it for this one. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see what happens Game 1.
See you guys next time.
Signing off.